here and we select the clone stamp, make this really small. You just need it to be as big to cover the halo. So I got it at 12 pixels now. Hardness is 0. I don't want it super hard. I want nice feathered adjustment. It's on darken blend mode. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find an area that's right next to the rock. So I'm going to go right here. I click right here to sample the area that I want to use. And then I come over to where the halo is, and I just click and hold, and I just follow it all the way around. And what that does is it only affects the lighter pixels. So you can see the before and after. It won't affect the rocks, and it won't affect the sky. It only affects the light pixels right between the sky and the rock. And it seems kind of tedious, but actually it goes by fairly quick. And if for some reason your sky is, for whatever reason, if you make an adjustment and you think that it doesn't look right, or maybe you have your hardness turned up, you can always come up here and adjust your opacity and tone it down and blend it in to make sure that the clone stamp that you just used blends real well with between the sky and the rock. So again, sample right next to where you want to be, and just use that clone tool, and that'll fix your halos. And it goes by fairly fast. It's not a huge time constraint because you're only doing the edges, so it's fairly easy. But again, when you blow up images to print, that's going to be something judges are going to look at as well. So you always want to make sure that you have the halos fixed so that you have even transitions between your foreground and your sky. And the next thing we are going to do is I'm going to show you real fast how to identify dust bunnies in your image. So here's an image I took from Iceland. It's got chromatic aberration on it right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to check this box. That goes away. Go back to fit to screen. And I see a few dust bunnies on here, but I'm going to show you a way to identify where they all are. And that is simply, and like I say, you can do this in Lightroom as well. These are all the same. So go to Detail, Masking, and then click the Alt button. And now you can see all those dots in the sky. That's where your dust bunnies are. You can see where the clouds are as well, but all the round dots in the sky, that's where the dust bunnies are. And when you go to print, you want to make sure that you have removed all of those. Because the larger your print, the easier it's going to be to see them. Whether you can see them on your computer screen or not, when you go to print and you have a large print and somebody's looking at it, they'll be able to identify the light and dark spots in the sky and they'll pick it out fairly easy. So I like to use the masking tool, and then I can see where they are, and then I can go back in and I can clean them up. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that in just a second. I'll go ahead and open this image. There's a couple ways to do it, but there's one way that's fairly fast. So once I have them identified, I have all these ones I can see to the left here up in the blue sky, and I have these darker ones here in the lighter sky on the right-hand side. So I could take my healing brush, and I could just go over each of them like this. And that's one way to do it. It's fairly fast. and gets rid of them. But there's also another way to do it, and I'm going to show you that. So I got these 4 right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I'll do is, if I have a lot of them, I'll just take my lasso tool and make sure that it's on add, lasso, 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 lasso. There's one there. The more you go up in percentage of viewing, the more that you'll find. And I could probably, I shot this when I had a very, very dirty sensor, so I could probably do this for quite a while, but I think I got most of them. So now that I have them all selected, and there they are, I can just go up here to edit, fill, make sure that content aware is checked, 100% normal blend mode, and click OK, and then they all go away. And then you can just deselect, and now you're done. So dust bunnies can be a huge problem, and I've noticed it in images that when I've judged at the Lone Tree. No offense to Chuck, I love the guy to death, but he's notorious for leaving a dust bunny here and there. And sometimes I just wonder if he does it just if I can pick it out. But yeah, so dust bunnies are huge. You might not see this with your naked eye, but I'll guarantee you that when you print it up 20 by 30, 30 by 40, it's going to show up, and you're going to have to get it reprinted if it's a competition that you want to move forward with. So dust bunnies are a big thing. I believe that you should definitely get rid of all of them before you go to print. So now we are going to talk about removing distractions in your images. And it's similar to, we're going to do 2 different images, both with things that need to be removed. And it's a similar way. This is a picture I took out in Kansas the other day. And I'll be honest, when I'm out shooting, I look at the scene, make sure that the subject is okay, make sure that it's placed right, things like that. But things I don't notice are small things in the field. Like this. So here's an old piece of metal or something. So same thing, use the healing brush, come over here and get rid of it. And there's another piece of metal here, I believe, right here, yeah. So right here, you want to get rid of that. You can do the same thing with the healing brush. Sometimes I find that if you do the lasso tool with the fill, it doesn't work as well. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know, I think I would probably fix that just because I noticed that it's odd. So I go back out and I would deselect that, use the healing brush, and then just kind of make that doesn't really work too well either, but what you can do. And this is where I try a bunch of different things. So now I'll use the clone tool. And make it fairly big so that it covers it. Change it to about 80%. And then you don't usually want to take a sample from right next to where it is. I'll take a sample from over here on the left-hand side. And I just come in here and run it out like that. And that looks a lot more natural than either way that I did before with the fill tool or the healing brush. So that's one way to remove distractions from a scene like this. Clean it up a little bit. The next is power lines. And this works the same way for airline trails. If you have plane trails in your night images, or you have power lines in your images, this works the same way. And this is a little bit faster. And I like this way because it's just 2 clicks and they're gone. And it works well if they're straight lines. If you have an airplane that comes in here and goes like this and does a turn and goes back the other way, this is not going to work. But if you have straight lines like this is how it works. Go to your healing brush, make it just slightly bigger than the power line. You're going to click and then go to the end of it and shift click, and it's gone. So it's click, shift click, and it's gone. And this is, oh, that's not what I want. I found that this is much easier than trying to hold my hand steady and use the healing brush to go all the way over it. Shift click and shift click. And then the same thing here. Because I highly doubt that an image like that has telephone wires in it is gonna be good. So remove those distractions. They're pretty easy. If you want to use the lasso tool, you can do this. I find that it's a little bit more tedious, but you can lasso around here and then choose fill, content aware, make sure it's 100%, click OK. But if you have a lot of texture in the sky, it may not work perfectly. So that's where the shift and the shift click, or the click and the shift click work the best, working from one end to the other. And that worked out okay. So I prefer the click and the shift click, and then it takes care of it really easy if they're straight lines. Okay, let's see, what have we got? Okay, next one is very crucial, especially in landscapes. So years ago when I shot this image, I did not have a level or a grid in my camera. I had to eyeball everything, and there can be a lot of optical illusions when you're looking at a scene. But this image is not level. So to level it in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, I just put the grid on here, and then I use the rotate tool. So now what I'm doing is I'm looking at this line right here to make sure it's straight. The reason I'm not looking at this over here is because this rock actually curves towards me. It's further away from me here than it is over here by probably 50 to 60 feet. So I'm not trying to level where it curves, because then this goes down. I want this straight line on the horizon to be level. And I can do it that way, or I can click automatic, and sometimes it works okay. So that worked okay. Sometimes it doesn't work as well. So I like to just do it manually and have the full control over it. But in landscape photography, as well as most other types of photography, it's very crucial to have your image level. There's some architecture photography where they have weird angles and they use super wide angle lenses, and it's more for an artistic effect. But landscape photography, if you're going to enter prints, competitions, you've got to be level. And let's see, the next one is one that is good for the final part of the processing, and that is sharpening. And so I'm going to show you that. Open this up in Photoshop. So after we've done all of our processing, we've done color balance, we fixed the halos, we have made all of our adjustments. Now it's time to sharpen for print and make sure that we bring out as much detail in the image as we possibly can. And it varies on the amount of sharpening for different mediums. But there's one general rule of thumb that I like to follow, and that is if there's no detail or texture in the sky, there's no reason to sharpen it, because what happens is you're going to introduce artifacts, and I'm going to show you that. So I'm up here at 300%. So you can see that there's a little bit of grain already. But now if I go up here and I sharpen it to how I would for a print, now you can see how much it's really accentuated that. So there's with the sharpening, and there's without the sharpening. And I can guarantee you that your image is going to look a lot better printed if you do not have the sky sharpened. So how do we sharpen the image without sharpening the sky? I'll show you. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create two layers, or a duplicate layer. And then we are going to, we will sharpen the image like we normally would. And so for me personally, when I do most all of my prints, I use unsharp mask. And this is just the way I do it. There's literally encyclopedias out there that there's a whole world of sharpening and how to sharpen, and you can read it and you can, you know, make your own decisions based on the information that you're giving. But this is what I have found works best for my work. So this is how I do it. I go to sharpen, unsharp mask. And for years and years, I was going a radius of 1 at 100%. And that was working pretty good. But then I got to thinking that maybe we do a half a radius at a higher amount. So now I'm doing about a half a radius at around 260. So now when we look, I hope that you guys can see this, but now when we look at this detail in this rock, it's super sharp. There's tons of detail. And I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see the detail here in the rock. And then I'll toggle this on and off. So there's without the sharpening, and this is with the sharpening. And you can see the amount of detail that it brought back. And it may look a tiny bit grainy on the screen, but that's okay, because when you go to print, it's not going to look quite like this. It's going to look maybe 90% like this. So you can go a little bit further with the sharpening than what you probably think you can. And all the different types of medium and paper that you print on, whether it be canvas, fine art paper, metal, the paper that metal's printed on, or acrylics, you know, it all of it has some level of absorption when the ink goes to it. So that's why you can get away with doing a little bit more sharpening than what you probably think you can. So again, here's before and here's after. So now you can see that the sky is sharpened, but we don't want the sky sharpened. So what we do is we have our sharpened layer on top, the unsharpened layer on the bottom. So all we're going to do is we are going to make a selection for the sky. And this over here doesn't have to be perfect. It won't be able to be noticeable. And then I'm going to make an invert. And then I'm going to go down here and add a layer mask. So now what that has done, it's allowed me to keep the sharpening for the rocks. And if I alt-click on this, let's see. So you can see that there's no sharpening in the sky now, and only the sharpening is applied to the rocks by putting that layer mask on there. So now when you go to print, you don't have the excess sharpening in the rock or in the sky, but also you want to be a little bit cautious in the sand as well. It has a tendency to get too sharp sometimes. And so anywhere that you don't want the sharpening applied, all you have to do is take a black brush and you can just paint it out. I can even use a fairly big black brush here. And I can just paint out all the sharpening in the foreground, even up into the water if I wanted. So now the sharpening only is going to apply to the rock and not to the sand and not to the sky. And when you go to print, that'll just help to create a much cleaner image. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. So now there's our mask. So that only the white has been sharpened and none of the black has. And that just helps to keep the colors in the image smoother in the smooth parts and more detailed in the parts where it needs detail. So I realized that was very quick and probably quicker than what you guys were expecting, but if you guys have any questions and want me to answer, I'm happy to.
Darren, I have one question for you. Well, I've screwed up and didn't start my recording until you got to the dust bunnies. Can you repeat a couple of those since I'm recording it, and we'll just back those up a little bit and then we can ask the questions?
Sure.
And then we did have a question on the power lines. Would the lasso tool work better if there was a bend in the line? So.
Okay, let me go back to proper exposure.
Okay.
And I'm going to open this with Photoshop. So before you when you're out shooting your pictures, it's really important, and I tell this to everybody in my workshops and every other photographer that I work with, that it's important that you have a proper exposure. Don't just underexpose and then think, well, I'll bring it up later in post. Sometimes that is okay, but not all the time. And if you have a scene in front of you that you truly believe is one that you're gonna print, maybe sell, maybe enter into competition later that year, you definitely wanna dial in the exposure. And you can bracket if you want, and chances are you're probably gonna take the brighter exposure. But what I wanna show you guys here is these are both images shot back to back that were at 1600 ISO the other morning. And in the underexposed image on the left, you can see the noise. It's very perceptible here. In the image on the right, you don't really notice the noise too much in the sky. But then even as we go down, the whites are cleaner in the properly exposed image, and they're much dirtier in the underexposed image. And if we go down a little bit further, we notice it more on the windows over here, very well exposed, nothing's blown out. And then over here, you definitely see grain or noise. And then people may ask, well, why don't you just bring it up in post. Okay, so let's do that. So I have my layers here. I have the left-hand side selected. So I'm going to add an adjustment to it. I'll make an exposure adjustment. I'm going to Alt-click so that that exposure adjustment only targets the underexposed image right below it. And now I'm going to bring up my exposure. And you can see that even though these images were taken back to back, the light hadn't changed. The image on the right, the well-exposed image, is still a much cleaner image. The yellows get dirty, and even up in the sky, you really can't even see the noise, but now you can see the noise a lot. And especially right here, I don't know what they call this on the barn, but you can definitely see the whites are a lot cleaner. They're much dirtier on the underexposed side. So no matter what ISO you're shooting at, whether it be ISO 50, ISO 400, or ISO 6400, you always want to expose to the right, get the cleanest image you can possibly get by allowing as much light to hit the sensor as possible at the time of capture. And by having a bright, clean image to start with, you're going to get a much better finished product. So even all the way down here into the little grasses, you can see that it's much more detailed and better exposed on the right-hand side, much more muddy and more grainy on the left-hand side. So proper exposure is key. The histogram will tell you what you need to know. Do not let your eyes fool you. Chromatic aberration. Let's talk about that for a minute. Right here. So with chromatic aberration, we do this in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. What chromatic aberration is it's when there's high contrast scenes between skies and rocks, where there's a huge light difference. It doesn't generally render the tonal values correctly between the two. So we have here, you can see green here, and then down here, oops. On this here, you can see green on the left-hand side, and you see purple on the right-hand side. So you want to get rid of this before you start your processing. And here's more purple on this side here. So there's two ways you can do this. I like the easy way, where you just come up here to the Optics tab and click Remove Chromatic Aberration. And when I do that, it all disappears. Both the green and the purple disappear. So that saves me from having to do them separately. But not every lens renders the chromatic aberration the same. So you may have more green or more magenta, depending on what lens you're using or the time of day. There's a lot of variables. So if I wanted to just get rid of the purple, what I could do is I could come over here to the defringe, use the selection tool here, and then come over and click right on the purple. And then I can adjust the amount that I want, because it's already given me the tonal values that it's going to adjust. But now I can lighten and darken it based on my personal preference. And then, as you can see, the green is still here, so I would have to do that as well. And I believe, yeah. So in addition to removing the purple, now I've removed the green as well. And I can have it show up, or I can have it be removed. But you really want to remove this chromatic aberration before you start your processing, because what happens is you'll go through and you'll add contrast, more contrast, and you'll add different color balances, and you'll add saturation, and you'll add vibrance. And what happens is that just accentuates the chromatic aberration that's there. And while you probably can't see it if you show it on Facebook or Instagram, when you have an image you want to show at the Lone Tree competition or the Exploring the Light competition, and you think, wow, that's great. And then you blow it up to 24 by 36 or, you know, whatever size it is you want to show it at. And you're like, holy cow, what is all this weird color on the edges of my rocks or the corners of my houses or whatever it is. And then you'll have to fix it, get it reprinted. So I definitely suggest that everybody click remove chromatic aberration on every single image that you do, no matter what, just as a safeguard to prevent from happening where you're going to have something reprinted. I also recommend that you look at your images at between 300 to 400%, especially for like dust bunnies, chromatic aberration, just things that you wouldn't normally see when you're looking at it at 100%. That'll definitely help you identify what needs to stay and what needs to be gone. So then we have halos. Halos are a big one. So open this with Photoshop. Halos are caused generally by when you make a selection around something and then you make an adjustment for that selection. If you don't have your select and mask settings correct, what can happen is you get these halos. So like I've made an adjustment for the sky, but when I had my selection around the rock, it didn't quite go into the rock. So I have this white halo that most people would never see, but again, this is for prints and competitions, and you want to give the best image that you possibly can when you're submitting your work. So how do we fix these halos? It's very simple, and I'm going to show you. So the first thing we do is we make a duplicate layer, and then we change the blend mode to darken. And the reason we change the blend mode to darken is because we only want to affect the lightest pixels. We don't want to affect the darker pixels that are in the rock or in the sky. We just want to affect these light pixels right around the edge. So this is darkened. We've made a duplicate layer. We're going to come up and we're going to check the clone stamp tool. We want to make sure that the hardness is at 0%. And we want to make sure that it's fairly small. We just want enough to cover the halo. We don't want it, we're not going to do this. We just want it to cover the halo. So once we have the size of our brush that we want to take a sample from right next to the halo where we're going to follow along. So I'm going to sample right here. That's just holding down the Alt and clicking. And now I have my sample, and now I can just go right along the edge, and it will remove the halos. And this is a pretty slick way to do it. So you can see right here, before and after. And that's going to give your image a lot smoother transition between the sky and the foreground, especially when you go to print. When you go to print, these lines will be even more noticeable. So you want to make sure that you remove those halos. And it sounds and looks like it could be time consuming, but realistically, it's only around the edges of the rocks. That's not the entire image. So, and sometimes the halos, depending on your mask, it doesn't cause halos, and other times it does. So you might have halos on this side, but maybe you don't have halos on this side. So it's just, I'll go through that real quick one more time. So here's the white halo here, and all we're going to do is select the clone tool, and then Alt and click a sample that's right next to it, and then just follow it. Go right up around it. Now, when you get to curves like this, I can't do this because then I'm sampling the rock. So what I have to do is I just have to stop and resample, and then I can continue on. And it's a great way to improve your image, and it's very effective, and it's very simple. So So darken blend mode, that is what lets you target just the lighter pixels to darken them up. If the other pixels up over here in the sky and the pixels that are darker on the rock will not be affected. And then dust bunnies. I'll show you how to identify dust bunnies. We'll do this in Camera Raw, or you can do this in Lightroom. It's the same for either one. So this is an image I shot in Iceland. I can see a couple dust bunnies up here, and I want to make sure that I identify where all of them are so that I know. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here to under Detail, Masking. I'm going to hold the Alt key, click on Masking, and then I just kind of move this back and forth, and all those round dots in the sky, those are dust bunnies that I need to remove. So now that I have a really good idea of where they are, then I can go in and I can remove them. And I do that a couple different ways. I can use a lasso tool and a fill tool, or I can use a healing brush. I'll show you both of those. So the healing brush is fairly simple, and I think everybody's familiar with that. I like to keep mine on content aware. I usually make the size just not too much bigger than what the actual dust bunny is. You just click, and they go away fairly easy. And I'll see there's a dust bunny right here that's super hard to see, but finish it up, see that. And that's what we want to eliminate. We don't want to have to continually reprint because we made errors. We want good, clean images. That's how you do it with the healing brush. I'm going to show you now with the lasso tool. This is usually what I do just because there's a lot of them. I grab the lasso tool and I circle them. And then once I have them circled, I come up here to Edit, Fill, make sure that Content Aware is checked, 100%, normal blend mode, and I just click OK. And then it does its thing and they're all gone. So that's how we get rid of dust bunnies. And you can use the lasso tool and the fill with Content Aware, or you can use the healing brush. But now if I go back into Adobe Camera Raw, and I go into masking, now most of them are gone. So I've done an okay job of cleaning them up. If this image was going to print, I would get rid of every single one of them, but you can definitely see the difference. So that's dust bunnies. And then also, dust bunnies might not be in the sky either. So here's one right here. This huge black thing. I still don't know how I got that. But anyway, I would just click that, use the healing brush. And this is a little bit more difficult because you're going to make sure that the rock matches. And it does a pretty good job. So yeah, check the entire image. I noticed that there are some down here that I would get rid of. Like I said, this was shot when I had a very dirty sensor and I had been in Iceland for about a week. So there's even one up here, one right here. So that's the dust bunnies and the healing brush and the lasso tool. And you want me to do the power line one again, Bruce?
No, that one, we just had a question that came in if the lasso tool would work better than the healing brush if there was a bend in the power lines, if the power lines weren't straight.
Yeah, if there's a bend in the power lines, then what I would do is I would definitely use the lasso tool. But the key with the lasso tool is try try to keep your lassoing really close to the power line. You don't want to go too far out. Let me show you something just real quick here. If you have one, it may not be a huge difference, but if you have several that you're doing, like I can't just come in here and go like this. Because generally what it's going to do is it's going to try to pick up a section over here with this other one, and it won't look right. And plus it has to work harder because, so see what it did here? It didn't do it right. So if I come up here and I just use this really tiny lasso, then it may work better. But yeah, so that worked. You just have to kind of keep your lassoing within a pretty close proximity to the actual whatever you're trying to get rid of. Even that's going to be too big. That's not going to work either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm assuming so. That was from Michael. So
Okay.
I don't see any other questions. I do have one gentleman, David Janine, said that the structure on the barn roof is called a cupola.
A cupola?
C-U-P-O-L-A, cupola.
Cupola, okay.
It's the same as the top of a railroad caboose, if anybody remembers those.
Oh, yeah.
And is there a purpose for them?
Well, in general, it would hold it. I'm not sure on the barn. It looks kind of like ventilation purpose, but I'm not sure at all there.
Any other questions, folks?
I've got one.
Yeah.
Do you ever use Topaz Sharpen AI for sharpening?
I do not use Topaz Sharpen AI. I'll be really honest and say that sometimes I will use, depending on what the image is, once I'm done processing it, sometimes if it has a little bit of excess noise that I want to remove, I'll use Topaz denoise. And then in that, there's a sharpening slider. And I can use that and fine tune the sharpening in that if I need to. And that seems to work really well.
And I'll speak a little bit to, I've used the Sharpen AI and the Topaz Labs just over, I guess, probably the last few months or whatever since I first got it. And I have noticed real good results with that. But you know what I have not done is gone and really inspected them, kind of like what Darren was showing in his example, as to what it's doing to the sky. I can see that it does, in my opinion, in that it does a really good job of, sharpening whatever the, in his example there, the rocks or whatever your subject is, and I'm real pleased with that. But I haven't gone in and see if it's also maybe, like he said, adding artifacts to the sky, or if it's sharpening areas that maybe you don't want to sharpen. So I'm real curious to, I haven't used the method that Darren just did. I kind of want to see, I want to do that and then maybe make a comparison and see how they come out. But that's I guess my 2 cents for the,
yeah.
The Sharpen AI, I find that does pretty well. And you know what, I'm sure it probably has an ability to either mask or identify which parts you want to sharpen versus not sharpen too. So
the latest version does have a mask tool.
Okay.
If I use it a little too much, it crashes my PC.
One other thing I did want to say real fast is that aside from using the masking in the optics tab, if you want to do your dust bunny removal in Adobe Camera Raw, or you want to do it in Lightroom, you can just crank up the clarity and the dehaze, and it'll show you your dust bunnies fairly well. And then you can use spot removal tool, which I never do. But you can do that in Lightroom if you wanted to. And then once you have all your spots picked out and removed, then you can go back to your, so I gotta mute this tab. You can go back to these and bring them back down to a regular level. That's one way of doing it as well. There's always 10,000 different ways to do the exact same thing. And it really just boils down to what you're comfortable with. But regardless of how you do it, these are the things that I truly feel that people should look for when they're serious about putting an image out there for others to look at.
One of the other things that's in the comments, and Sherry Peterson kind of beat me to the punch because I was going to say the same thing. Her comment is, "Thanks so much. I have struggled with halos and never found a good way to fix them." And what I was going to say is, as you were going through that, I wrote down the notes. I'm going to put that, type it out, and have it next to my computer at all times, because that's that little trick you did for getting rid of the halos looks so effective. And again, that was just with the clone stamp, darken blend mode, and then you're using parts from the lighter section of that and cloning that in against that line, right?
Now, let me bring up one other example of that so that you guys can see, because this was with a sunset sky. Let me bring up just really quick, if we have time. Don't laugh at all my images.
While we're waiting, Kathy Allen Shin said the cupola is used for ventilation and sometimes for light.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, so I'm bringing up an image that I shot in Iowa a few months ago, and it was on a stormy day, but I did darken the sky a little bit to make it a tad bit more dramatic. And so what happened was, again, I got the halo right here. So the same way is you just make a duplicate layer, change the blend mode to darken. Now, with this, if I go to my clone stamp and I change it to 100%, you might see some odd lines because it is so light and dark. So I'm going to show you that. Okay, so it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, but you can kind of see where there's an edge here that shouldn't be. So once I do my clone stamp, then I can come up here to fade clone stamp, and then I can smooth that transition out using the opacity. So there's 0% opacity, and you can see how it kind of blends in a little bit. So 86, so on my screen, 86 looks really good. So there's before, there's after, and that looks more natural to me. So anytime that you use the clone stamp tool to work on halos, you can always go in after you've done a section and use the fade, and you can adjust it so that it's perfect. Is there anything else anybody else wants to see?
Any more questions? I don't see any more comments, but.
Hey, Darren, I have a comment. I know it's not really part of this talk, but
That's okay.
if you're to not have as much noise in your picture, if you're exposing to the right, do you do that for your night photography tool? I know you're just running a whole bunch of different pictures one after another and blending them through those programs, but is your initial exposures for night photography exposing to the right as well?
Yeah, in theory, anytime that you can expose more to the right and get that left side off of the shadows so that the blacks aren't black, that's optimal. With night photography, it's a little bit different because Let's see here. I was going to show you an example, but I'll just use this one. If you have, so this is one I did in Kansas last week, and I lit the barn up just because there was no moonlight. But I didn't want to go too far because I didn't want to lose the color in the stars. If you go too far, the stars will just turn white, or they'll lose a lot of their color. But theoretically, yes, you want to expose as much as you can to get as much as you can off of the left-hand side of the histogram. So this was shot at 10,000 ISO. And if I would have shot this at 6,400, it would have been, well, it would have looked like this. It would have looked about like that. So by shooting it at 10,000 ISO, I was able to get a better image quality. I mean, the barn is, on my screen, the barn is super clean. There's not much noise. I can see this tractor back here. I got good detail in this sign right here. And there's not as much noise as if I were just to take a shot at 6,400 and then try to boost up the shadows. So yeah, when we're doing the workshops, we always want people to expose on the brighter side, because you can always tone down a little bit and it'll also give you a better image quality.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Darren, I got a question on the histogram.
Sure.
Yeah, when you use the histogram, are you looking at the histogram after each photo is taken, or are you looking at live view with the histogram on there?
That's a great question, and it's one that I would really love to answer. So on my Nikon D850, I don't have the ability to look at the histogram before I take the picture, or at least I'm not aware that I do. But I just purchased a Sony mirrorless, and now I do. The live view displays the histogram based on the settings that I have in the camera. So if I'm at f8 for 1 second and it says it's too dark, then I can go up to f8 at 5 seconds, or I can go 1 second at f4, and it will adjust the histogram accordingly. So I can physically see what I'm shooting. I can physically see the histogram before I ever take the shot. And that to me is huge. So if you have the ability in whatever camera that you shoot, or whatever camera anybody shoots, to look at the histogram before you take the shot, that will save you so much time, because you're not going to have to take 3 test shots to get the right shot. You know, if like what I do is I think, okay, I have a good idea of where this is supposed to be, so I'll take the shot, and it's too dark. So then I'll change my settings and I'll take another shot, and it may be better, but it may be too dark still. So then I'll take another shot to get it dialed in right where I want it. But with those Sony mirrorlesses, and I'm guessing it's going to be the same with Fuji, Pentax. I don't know if Pentax does mirrorless, but the Olympus mirrorlesses, I'm guessing that because they have electronic viewfinders, that they can provide you with that information before you ever take the shot. So in my opinion, that's incredible. And that's one thing I truly love about the little Sony, is that I can see exactly what the histogram is going to look like before I ever press a shutter.
You can see in live view on the Nikon. You can pull up a histogram and see it live.
Yeah, there is a way to do that. There are a couple settings you can do that.
Okay, I have never done that, so.
Yeah, so it's obviously not as convenient as the electronic viewfinder, but
Yeah.
if you flip over to the live view, you can push your info button a couple times and it'll pop up your histogram.
Yeah,
I'll
that's what it was.
check that out. Yeah, I usually have just my electronic level on mine, so.
Yeah, if you just keep pushing the info button, it'll switch screens, show you different stuff.
Oh, okay.
I think on the Nikon, when you do that, like you say, hit the info and you do get the histogram that shows, but you give up, like you said, the level. You don't get the,
Yeah.
there's something that you give up by going to that.
Right, but it allows you to switch through them, so you can just click. You have
That's true.
It's up to show them all, yeah. It's not, yeah, because I know in my Z7, you can see freaking everything in the viewfinder now. It's all there.
Oh, yeah, you got the mirrorless one. Yeah.
Yep. Nice.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thanks.
Well,
Dick.
yeah, this was really helpful there. I mean, just all the notes. Like I say, you know, a few of those things I do to some extent, but there's a lot of things that I picked up tonight that, you know, once again, great takeaways for preparing my images that I know I'm guilty of. At least half of the things that you just pointed out that are flaws, and a lot of things that end up going in a competition. So
Yeah,
appreciate it.
you know, things that most people know about, but they don't see them, or it's not like I always suggest that people edit their images and look at them closely at between 300% and 400%, because you're going to see things that you just can't see at 100%. And you know, when you take a 35 millimeter sensor and you blow it up to a 24 by 36 print or a 30 by 40 print, you're going to see those things that you couldn't see on the screen.
Again, thanks once again. And I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself. Or
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions or go over anything again. No problem.
It's a quiet group.
You
Well,
explained it too well.
exactly. So with that, I guess you know, we'll go ahead and end tonight's meeting. And then like I said, I think the next one is the competition September 9th. So it's coming up pretty soon. And again, that's a themed one. So it's abstract. So that time to go out and get those ones.
Yeah, abstract reflections.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks again, Darren. And thanks again, everybody, for attending tonight. This was good.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.